Revenge with Karen.
Jesus, are we defending against a paper cut? Martin Greaves snorted, holding up the quarterly compliance binder like it smelled bad. What even is a records officer? Sounds like something from a 1973 office sitcom. Do we still use fax machines too? The room laughed. Or rather, a few people did, middle managers, compliance interns, the new HR rep who giggled at anything with a suit attached to it. Elizabeth Monroe didn't flinch. She was sitting 2 chairs down, hands folded neatly on a spiral-bound data lifecycle chart she'd personally updated last week. The binder Martin held was hers, and the policy inside, it had kept Cray Tech out of regulatory hell twice in the last 5 years, though you'd never know it by the way her name was omitted from every boardroom win. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just blinked once slowly, behind her wire-rimmed glasses. Martin Greaves was everything Cray Tech's new parent company loved. Loud, shiny, Ivy League. He showed up to meetings like he was auditioning for a legal drama, all rolled up sleeves and open disdain for legacy processes. He was brought in during the merger to reinvigorate the legal department, which apparently meant alienating everyone who'd actually built the department to begin with. To him, Elizabeth was paper lady. That's what he called her when he thought she wasn't listening. Digitize her out of relevance, he said during the last restructuring update. She's analog. Let's do a nice clean format, Control plus Alt plus Delete on anything older than SharePoint. She'd been there for 11 years. Elizabeth wasn't flashy. Her idea of a fashion risk was trading her brown loafers for gray ones on Fridays. But she was precise. Ridiculously so. Every document tagged, every policy updated. She was the reason Cray Tech had a spotless litigation record. She was the reason no external audit had ever bled into a fine. And she was the one who'd personally archived the vendor contracts that would later become problematic. But none of that mattered now. Not to Martin, not to the post-merger brass. They want agile, her director had said apologetically last month. People who can pivot, innovate, people who can throw out 10 years of documented processes because someone with a louder tie said so. She'd asked. He hadn't responded, just looked at the floor like it owed him rent. Now here she was, sitting in the same conference room she designed the compliance onboarding for, listening to Martin grandstand about eliminating process friction while holding the binder she built like it was a dirty diaper. I mean, who needs 6 retention tiers? Martin continued, flipping through her chart with a smirk. Let's simplify. If it's older than 2 years, it's out. Cloud search, baby. If Google can find it, so can we. Unless, Elizabeth said quietly, the document in question is part of an active legal hold or governed by a 10-year retention clause under Section 7 of the IP licensing agreement, in which case deleting it constitutes spoliation. The room went quiet. Martin's eyes narrowed. Thank you, Elizabeth, said with a smile so fake it might as well have been laminated. But I think we'll let legal make the calls on what's admissible and what's expendable. You are legal, she replied, still calm. I'm compliance. You advise, I execute. According to our policy, Section 3.2, you can't unilaterally override retention schedules without joint sign-off. He waved her off. We're updating that. She almost laughed. Almost. You'll need to resubmit it to the Policy Governance Committee. With board review. Right. That's being dissolved too, he said, half smirking. Streamlining. That word was being weaponized across every floor of the building. It had already taken out payroll, half of HR, and the entire data reconciliation team. Elizabeth had survived each round by being useful, but not visible. Essential, but not political. That strategy had always worked. Until now, because Martin wasn't looking for competence. He was looking for complicity. She found out later that same day that she'd been removed from the Data Risk Council. No email, no explanation, just a blank slot where her name used to be in the committee charter. She approached her director. He sighed. Martin wants to consolidate. Too many cooks, you know. I built the kitchen, she said. Exactly, he replied with a tired smile. And that's the problem. She walked out of his office without another word. But when she got back to her desk, she opened a new folder on her desktop. She named it Greaves Overrides. And inside it, she saved every memo, every meeting agenda, and every change request, starting with the one she'd just been cut from. They wanted paperless. She'd give them records. Every last one. The email hit every inbox at 8:02 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line: Fire Digital Hygiene Initiative Mandatory File Review and Destruction Fire. It was Martin's style. Emoji-laced subject lines, bold fonts, and weaponized buzzwords. In the body of the message, he declared the launch of Project Phoenix, aimed at reducing data bloat and aligning our document ecosystem with modern digital hygiene principles. Translation: delete everything that made him feel out of control. All non-critical files older than 24 months must be reviewed and scheduled for deletion by Friday. No exceptions, the memo read. We will also begin reducing off-site storage costs by 70% this quarter. If you have archived backups, legacy contracts, or technical logs that are no longer in active use, now is the time to let them go. He even signed it off with a cheery, "Let's make space for the future." Martin briefcase fire Elizabeth stared at it for a full minute before reaching for the data retention charter, which was still warm from a recent board certification. Section 5.4, Clause D. All vendor contracts shall be retained for no less than 7 years post-termination. Associated technical documentation must be preserved during any ongoing or reasonably anticipated litigation. She knew what this was. A purge, dressed up in shiny words and false urgency. And she also knew what was in those files. The vendor contracts tied to a custom middleware integration Cray Tech had used in 2018. The same vendor that sued another tech firm last year for unauthorized replication. The settlement had been quiet, but Elizabeth remembered reading the deposition summaries like they were bedtime horror stories. She also remembered Cray Tech's legal hold notices, still active on several related accounts. She flagged the memo. Replied. To Martin Greaves CC, Legal, Compliance, Data Ops Subject. Project Phoenix Retention Policy Conflict. Hi Martin. Just a note that several of the archived vendor contracts and their associated logs fall under our legal hold protocol from Q4 2021. Leading them would constitute a breach of retention policy and expose us to sanctions under both civil and regulatory frameworks. I've attached the relevant charter excerpts for your reference. She sent it, then printed it, stamped it, filed it, no reply. The next day, she saw a new directive in the shared legal folder. Phase 1 deletion list approved. Dozens of file clusters scheduled for termination. Legacy drives, offsite tapes. Internal SharePoint libraries, among them vendor contracts 2015-2019. Zip and middleware integration logs ACCSV. She stared at the screen like it was a live grenade. There wasn't just risk in those files. There was proof. Proof that Cray Tech had quietly reused code flagged as proprietary. Proof that warnings had been raised and ignored. Proof that Martin, 6 weeks into his tenure, signed off on removing the watermarking protocol that flagged derivative modules. She checked the metadata tags. 2 were still marked as lit hold active. That alone should have stopped everything. Instead, she was watching a car crash in slow motion with her name in the glove box. She stood up, walked 2 doors down to her director, and handed him a printed version of the email chain. He skimmed it and sighed. He says it's covered. He wants to move fast, as we're clinging to dead weight. And when we get subpoenaed, that's what insurance is for. She didn't respond. Just stared until he added, I'll forward this up. But don't hold your breath. She didn't. She went back to her desk and opened the Greaves Overrides folder again. She created subfolders. /phase 1 deletions / legal hold conflicts / sent objections / she copied every relevant email, every file deletion list, every timestamp. She exported the logs from the offsite vendor portal showing access and status changes. She printed the signed directives from Martin authorizing override of the legal hold tags. And then, quietly, she composed one more memo. To HR Compliance Archive Subject. Formal objection. Retention violation. Ref. Project Phoenix. In accordance with my duties as Records and Compliance Officer, I am formally documenting my objection to the destruction of files under active legal hold as outlined in Data Charter v4.3. These objections have been raised internally. I am preserving this record under Policy Section 9.2 and submitting this memo to both HR Archive and Compliance Lockbox. She saved it, printed 2 copies. One went to HR's confidential Dropbox, the other into her locked drawer. That night, long after the lights dimmed and Slack went quiet, she stayed behind to cross-check the most critical deletions. Every file had a log, every log had a signature, and every signature pointed to Martin. She didn't shout, didn't storm the boardroom. She just wrote it all down, because paper may burn quietly, but the smoke never lies. The HR woman was sweating through her blouse. Elizabeth noticed it as soon as she stepped into the beige-walled conference room that always smelled faintly of coffee breath and toner ink. Connie, her nameplate read, as if anyone needed a reminder. Elizabeth had seen her 3 times in 11 years, twice for onboarding new interns, once when she herself had flagged a payroll misclassification. Now here Connie sat, nervously clicking her pen like a Geiger counter. "Hi, Elizabeth," she said with a forced smile. "Thanks for coming in. I have Lisa from Legal on Zoom just to, walk us through the process." Elizabeth didn't sit down. She just placed a manila folder on the table and gently slid it forward. "That's my badge. Laptop's been wiped and reset to factory. Keys to the offsite archive locker are labeled and tagged." "Oh, wow, thank you," Connie said, fumbling for the folder. From the laptop screen, Lisa's voice crackled in. "Hi, Elizabeth. Wanted to thank you for your years of service. With the merger wrapping up, we're consolidating compliance roles across regions. Legal's taking over records retention oversight to streamline operations." There it was, streamlining again. Lisa kept talking, something about severance, COBRA, and future opportunities. Elizabeth tuned it out. Her hands were steady. Her breathing measured. She didn't even blink when Connie slid a release form across the table. Instead, she reached into her leather tote and pulled out a sealed document, folded once, stamped in red ink. Affidavit of Procedural Objection Retention Governance Conflict. Connie paused mid-pen click. "What's this?" Elizabeth met her eyes calmly. "A formal record of compliance objections I raised over the past 60 days, including documented legal hold violations and policy overrides enacted without committee review. It's notarized and filed under Clause 9.2 of the Data Charter. HR policy requires you to accept it into the permanent personnel file and archive it with legal review." Lisa coughed on the other end of the Zoom call. I don't think that's its policy," Elizabeth said, not angry, not smug, just stating a fact. Connie reached for the document like it might bite. Elizabeth turned to leave, then paused. She slid one final USB drive onto the table. "Backups of my certified logs and custodial indexes. Chain of custody tags included." Lisa tried to recover. "Well, we'll be in touch about transition documentation." "There's no transition," Elizabeth replied. "My access was revoked yesterday. Systems already scrubbed. That's everything I legally owe you." Connie blinked, her pen now silent, the form in front of her unsigned. "Oh, and Lisa," Elizabeth added before walking out, "you may want to revisit your understanding of spoliation law, particularly under Rule 37E. She didn't wait for a response. She just walked out. The building's hallways were colder than usual, fluorescent, artificial. She passed the framed photo of the founding team, 4 white men with half smiles and 2 women cropped just off-center, and didn't even spare it a glance. In her car, she sat quietly for a moment. Stillness felt earned. Then she opened the LinkedIn app on her phone, tapped Edit Profile, and changed her title. Independent Records Governance Consultant. Below that, she typed, specializing in litigation preparedness, retention policy integrity, and metadata chain preservation. Then she smiled, cold, small, but real, and hit save. By the time she pulled out of the parking lot, 2 unread emails had already landed in her inbox. The first was from HR, acknowledgement of separation documents received. The second was from Martin. Just 3 words, "Please return everything." She didn't reply. After all, she'd followed the policy. To the letter. The subpoena landed like a meteor. A courier hand-delivered it to Cray Tech's front desk, stamped urgent, sealed in thick ivory paper, addressed not to legal, but to General Counsel Martin Greaves. The receptionist didn't even have to look up his office number. By now, the building had internalized his existence like a tumor. Within 10 minutes, it was on his desk, nestled between a cold Americano and a half-finished notepad that still read Q4, cut more fat. Subject, Keller v. Cray Tech Solutions Civil Case, 22 to 4791 FD, amount in dispute. $480 million USD allegation. Breach of contract/IP misappropriation. Martin read it twice before slamming the document face down and muttering, "Of course those clowns came back." Keller Systems had been quiet since the failed negotiations 3 years ago. Quiet, but not stupid. Cray Tech had relied heavily on Keller's proprietary middleware to patch a product launch that should have never made it out of beta. The resulting software, a Frankenstein blend of desperation and borrowed code, which Martin, back when he was still a flashy outsider looking in, had assured the board was legally insulated by time. He was wrong. Now Keller's lawyers were alleging that Cray Tech not only stole proprietary code, violated the original termination clause by reusing technical frameworks beyond the agreed sunset date, a clause Elizabeth had once flagged in red pen. Twice, Martin marched into the boardroom that afternoon wearing his favorite tie, the one with tiny gavels printed on it. The partners were already seated, faces grim, eyes scanning the executive summary of the claim. The numbers weren't just scary. They were fatal. "Let's not panic," Martin began, spreading his hands like a magician about to do a card trick. "This is mostly a paper issue. Disputed language, old files, and exaggerated damages. We're looking at some aggressive posturing." The CFO didn't look convinced. "You're saying they don't have a case?" "I'm saying," Martin replied, "that we've already scrubbed the system of any ambiguous files. Legal's clean. We've got our own logs. We own our narrative." A beat passed. One of the board members, former litigator herself, looked up. "And the record's custodian?" Martin blinked. "What about her?" "I didn't see her name on the discovery disclosure list." "She's gone," he said, too quickly. "Left during the merger shuffle. We've absorbed records management into compliance ops." "Do they have her logs?" the litigator asked flatly. Martin hesitated. "They have current logs. Historical archives were verifying what's still relevant." That was the first crack. 2 weeks later, response to Cray Tech's first discovery production, opposing counsel flagged dozens of discrepancies. Internal emails with broken headers, missing attachment records, logs that ended mid-thread with no explanation. Worse, some contract versions had altered timestamps, showing edit dates 2 weeks after the data hold was issued. Then came the metadata, redacted, sloppy, obviously tampered with. The judge issued a formal discovery warning, instructing Cray Tech to produce the certified records custodian or submit sworn justification for their absence. The memo was clear. Failure to do so may result in evidentiary sanctions. Martin's bluffing started to fray. Internally, he insisted it was a witch hunt. "They're digging for ghosts," he told legal. "Old stuff. None of it holds up. Keller's just fishing because they can't match our market share." But outside the boardroom, his tone changed, demanded that it reverse engineer the missing documents. He ordered compliance ops to scrub every SharePoint cache and backup drive for contract variants that aligned with his narrative. When one analyst quietly reminded him that modifying retroactive versions could constitute fabrication, Martin smiled thinly and said, "Just bring me clean versions. Don't ask how the sausage is made." By Friday, legal's inbox was flooded with anxiety. Half the junior counsel team refused to touch the flagged folders. The whispers started. Didn't Elizabeth manage those archives? Wasn't there a legal hold on that vendor? Why isn't she on the witness list? Martin silenced them with fire drill meetings and furious edits to internal timelines. But the pressure wasn't just internal anymore. That Sunday, while reviewing a second batch of file discrepancies, opposing counsel formally requested a hearing to discuss potential spoliation. Attached to their request, a footnote that read, "We are prepared to call Miss Elizabeth Monroe as a witness, should the court require validation of Cray Tech's record-keeping protocols." Martin didn't sleep that night. He just stared at his laptop until dawn, cursor blinking over an email he didn't send. Subject line, Monroe, but it was too late for emails now. The fuse was lit. Elizabeth's name was no longer just a footnote. It was the match. The courtroom had that cold, antiseptic quiet that only high-stakes litigation can conjure, like a church, but with more knives. Martin sat stiffly at the defendant's table, flanked by Cray Tech's lead counsel and a jittery junior associate who looked like she hadn't blinked since 8 a.m. The judge, a stern woman with graying curls and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain, spent the last 20 minutes flipping through the newest motion packet with a look of mounting irritation. Across the aisle, Keller's legal team radiated calm contempt. Their lead, Vincent Torres, had that slow blink arrogance of a man holding 10 aces and only needing one. And then came the question. "Mr. Greaves," the judge said, voice crisp, "we've reviewed the conflicting document versions and the metadata inconsistencies. At this time, the court is formally requesting the appearance of your certified records custodian for deposition." The words hit like a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet. Martin's mouth opened, closed, then stammered back to life. "Your Honor, Miss Monroe is no longer employed at Cray Tech. The role was consolidated during post-merger restructuring. We've since, folded records management into our compliance oversight division. The judge arched an eyebrow. Why is she still listed as the custodian of record on all governance filings through Q2? Martin blinked. Those filings predate her departure. We have a current team managing, Vincent Torres, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat with theatrical precision. Your Honor, we're aware Miss Monroe no longer works for Cray Tech. The judge glanced at him. Then why raise the request? Torres smiled, a slow, wolfish thing. Because we've subpoenaed her directly. Martin stiffened. There was a beat of dead air. She received the notice yesterday afternoon, Torres continued. Confirmed by signed courier. We intend to depose her on Friday regarding Cray Tech's data retention enforcement, legal hold compliance, and document access protocols during the relevant period. Martin tried to interject. She no longer has access to company systems. Any data she held was preserved under Cray Tech's own retention policy, or as interrupted smoothly. We have reason to believe she maintained sealed custodial logs and internal objections related to the deletion of vendor files. As outlined in Exhibit F, he held up a document, Elizabeth's internal memo, watermarked, time-stamped, signed, the one she'd filed with HR, the one Martin had waved off as cover-your-ass noise before tossing it in his trash folder. The judge took it without a word, scanned the first page, and nodded. Very well. Miss Monroe's deposition is approved. If needed, we'll call her to testify during evidentiary review. Martin's tongue felt thick in his mouth. But Your Honor, she's not authorized to represent company positions. She's authorized to speak to facts, the judge replied coolly. And given the inconsistencies in your discovery submissions, the court requires those facts. The gavel came down once, light, final. Recess until 10:30 Friday. As the room emptied, Martin didn't stand right away. He just sat there, staring at the defense table like it had betrayed him personally. Outside counsel leaned over and whispered, "We told you to loop her in." Martin didn't respond. He couldn't. He was already replaying every memo, every override, every smug line he'd tossed her way like she was an obsolete filing cabinet with legs. Now she was a witness. And he was bleeding metadata. Phone rang at 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday. Elizabeth was in the kitchen, halfway through boiling linguine and listening to a true crime podcast about a forged will, when the unknown number lit up her screen. DC area code. She wiped her hands on a towel and answered without hesitation. Monroe, she said, voice crisp, defaulting to the tone she'd used for over a decade whenever someone called her after hours with a data panic. Elizabeth, came the reply, low and amused. Torres. Keller Systems, she said nothing. Just walked to the sink and turned off the burner. On the other end, Vincent Torres chuckled, the kind of slow, confident laugh that only comes from someone who already knows the ending of the movie. You kept the chain of custody logs, didn't you? A long pause. Then Elizabeth replied, her voice flat as steel, "Do you have a question related to your case?" "Oh, I've got 100. But let's start with the easy ones. You recall receiving a written request from Mr. Greaves to delete archived vendor files in March of this year. I recall receiving multiple directives. I followed all company protocols." Another pause. Torres let out a small sigh of admiration. "You're good. No wonder he's spiraling." She walked into her office. Small, quiet, neat as a crime scene. The hard copy binder sat where it always had, second shelf, labeled Retention Overrides Phi 21 Phi 22. Her laptop was already on. The folder Greaves Overrides opened instantly. Inside, signed directives, objection memos, access logs, timestamp receipts, export certificates, even the courier confirmation from the day she submitted her HR affidavit. "I'll remind you," she said evenly, "that any attempt to elicit protected company information without court authorization constitutes witness tampering." "Oh, not tampering," Torres said smoothly. "I'm anticipating. You've been subpoenaed. Should arrive tomorrow." Friday deposition, 10:30 a.m. Federal court, standard protocols. I'll be there, I know. The call hung there for a moment, silent on both ends like they were two chess players staring at a board mid-game. Elizabeth reached for a Post-it and wrote "suit dry clean" in small block letters. "Just so you know," Torres said finally, tone shifting to something slower. "As performative, I read your memo. The one you filed with HR, that was surgical." She said nothing. "I've been doing this 20 years. Usually when someone gets fired, they burn the place down with rage or stay silent and bitter. But you left the exact number of breadcrumbs required. No more, no less. Even the objections were filed under policy code. It's like you wrote the script for your own resurrection. Elizabeth allowed herself a faint smile. Policy is not art, Mr. Torres, it's structure. Well, he said, the structure is beautiful. He hung up. She stared at the phone for a moment, then turned to her laptop and began reviewing the sealed log file, metadata from the March deletions, specifically the ones tagged lit hold active. She didn't need to dig. She already knew which files were missing. She'd printed the comparison logs 6 months ago, anticipating this very scenario. She wasn't a whistleblower. He didn't go to the press. She didn't call a lawyer when they cut her loose. She followed the chain, preserved the tags, notified the right inboxes, and then she waited. Because the thing about records, real records, not press releases or Slack threads or last-minute excuses, is that they endure. She opened a new tab, checked her calendar. Friday morning was clear. She reached for her leather tote, opened the zippered inner pocket, pulled out the flash drive labeled Custodian Copy Fi 22. Still sealed. Still cold. Then, slowly, she smiled. Let the deposition begin. Federal court smelled like marble, cold air, and fear deodorized with citrus. Elizabeth stepped through security with the kind of quiet confidence that makes people assume you belong. Charcoal blazer, pressed slacks, silver clasped briefcase in her left hand. Nothing flashy. Everything deliberate. Hair was pinned back in the same tight bun she wore the day she was hired at Cray Tech 11 years ago. A full circle, except now she carried a sealed file that might implode a $500 million defense. The courtroom was already half full. Martin sat at the defendant's table, hunched forward, lips thin, face pale despite the forced smile he gave the moment she walked in. His tie was crooked. His cuff was stained with coffee. Man who looked like he hadn't slept since the subpoena hit. Elizabeth didn't look at him. She approached the witness box like it was just another off-site storage audit. No drama, just documentation. She placed her briefcase down, opened it, and handed her sealed affidavit and certified custodian logs to the court clerk with the same care one might use to pass a relic to a museum. Vincent Torres, for the plaintiff, rose. Your Honor, this is Elizabeth Monroe, former Records and Compliance Officer for Cray Tech Solutions. She held the designation of Certified Custodian from 2014 through her departure earlier this year. The judge gave a polite nod. Miss Monroe, do you affirm that your statements today will be truthful under penalty of perjury? I do. Torres smiled faintly. Let's begin. For the next 20 minutes, Elizabeth answered questions with surgical precision. Every file version, every policy clause, every timestamp. When asked about the data deletion directive issued under Project Phoenix, she recited the retention charter verbatim, including the section on legal hold exceptions. When shown the deletion log, she pointed to the entries labeled Vendor Contracts 2015-2019. Zip, and noted the original legal hold tags, visible in the exported metadata, then absent post-deletion. Those files part of an active legal hold at the time? Torres asked. Yes, she replied. Marked as such in 2 separate systems, SharePoint Archive and the Offsite Tape Index. Did you flag this to leadership? I did. How? Elizabeth reached into her briefcase and pulled out a printed copy of the internal objection memo, signed, timestamped, and filed through HR's compliance archive. Torres held it up. Is this your memo? Yes. Is that your signature? Yes. Handed it to the judge, who began flipping through it with slow, deliberate interest. Then Martin stood. Objection, he snapped. Your Honor, the witness no longer works for Cray Tech. She lacks current authorization to testify to company practices. The judge raised an eyebrow. She's testifying to past practices during her tenure. That is well within bounds. Martin pressed on, his voice rising. She's not impartial. She was terminated during restructuring. She has motive. Elizabeth didn't flinch. I wasn't terminated. I was laid off. I left with a signed severance, no litigation. My motive is accuracy. Torres leaned in. Miss Monroe, can you tell the court who signed the directive authorizing deletion of those vendor contract files? Without looking up, she turned a page in her binder and read. Directive 3, dated March 17, 2023. Subject, Legacy Cleanup Offsite Archive Reduction. Signed by Martin Greaves, General Counsel. Martin froze. Do you have the original signed version of that directive? She nodded and slid it to the clerk. Martin tried again. That document was part of an internal initiative. It was not intended for discovery. Were you aware, Torres cut in, that those files were under active legal hold when you signed that order? Martin opened his mouth, but the judge spoke first. You signed off on this deletion. Silence. Martin looked down at the table like it might answer for him. Elizabeth closed her binder, her fingers folding over the leather corners with quiet finality. The air in the courtroom felt thinner, crisper. The only sound was the faint scratching of the judge's pen. Torres sat down, satisfied. Elizabeth remained seated, eyes forward, expression blank. Not smug, not emotional, just exact, like the records she'd protected. The motion came down like thunder in silk gloves. Based on preliminary testimony and the submitted documentation, the judge began, voice even but edged like glass. This court is opening a formal motion for Rule 37 sanctions. We have sufficient grounds to suspect spoliation of evidence, specifically deletion of documents under active legal hold. Martin didn't move. Couldn't. Across the room, Cray Tech's in-house legal team looked like they'd just swallowed battery acid. Melissa Frakes, Deputy GC, subtly angled her chair away from Martin, lips pursed like she was already rehearsing her resignation statement. 2 seats over, the junior associate who'd been assigned to help prep discovery kept blinking fast, hands white-knuckled under the table. The judge continued. Counsel for the defendant is instructed to prepare a full accounting of all deleted materials, associated directives, and internal compliance objections, if any exist, for submission by end of week. A hearing for sanctions will be scheduled thereafter. Then, without missing a beat, she looked to Elizabeth. Miss Monroe, thank you for your cooperation. You're excused. Elizabeth stood slowly, collected her documents with quiet grace, and nodded once. She didn't look at Martin. Didn't need to. He was shrinking now, folding inward like paper in rain. Whatever version of himself he thought he was, the gladiator lawyer, the fast-talking fixer, was crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. As she walked down the aisle, Torres offered a small, respectful nod. She returned it with the faintest lift of her chin. No gloating, just mutual understanding. They both knew what this was, the beginning of the end. The courtroom doors swung open and the hallway erupted like a beehive. Cameras, boom mics, shouted questions from local reporters who'd gotten wind of the hearing once multi-million-dollar sanctions made it into the court record. Miss Monroe, did Cray Tech delete vendor files under active legal hold? Were you pressured to stay silent? Do you believe Mr. Greaves acted maliciously? She said nothing. Not a word. Just kept walking, heels clicking clean against marble. The reporters parted like water. One camera panned back toward the courtroom doors, now creaking open again, and out came Martin. He looked like a man who just realized the ice wasn't frozen all the way through. His suit jacket hung wrong. His forehead glistened under the camera lights. Someone shouted his name. Mr. Greaves, did you authorize the deletion? He started to answer, then froze mid-step. Behind him, Melissa Frakes peeled off toward a side hallway, speaking urgently into her phone. Look on her face was unmistakable. Don't tether me to this sinking ship. An hour later, the leaks began. Anonymous sources confirmed to a legal blog that Cray Tech's insurance carrier had initiated a formal review of their coverage, citing potential willful misconduct in the handling of legal holds. If confirmed, Cray Tech would be on the hook for the full cost of the suit, plus sanctions, plus reputational damage. Back in the Cray Tech boardroom, panic bloomed like mold in the corners. 2 VPs demanded outside counsel. HR refused to sign off on a prepared press statement. The CFO called for a closed-door audit of all executive decision logs tied to Martin's name, and the IT director quietly contacted compliance to ask if Elizabeth's memo still existed in hard copy. It did. Of course it did. Meanwhile, Elizabeth sat in a small coffee shop across from the courthouse, sipping an espresso and reading through the motion packet printed from Pacer. She didn't gloat. There was nothing satisfying about a structure collapsing when you'd already spent years propping it up. She just flipped the page, found the section marked Section Roman 3 Custodial Failure Analysis, and underlined one sentence with a red pen. Signed deletion orders issued with full knowledge of legal hold status may constitute gross negligence or intentional spoliation. She put the pen down, checked her phone. No new messages, no surprises. The final act hadn't arrived yet, but the fire had started. And now, finally, it had a name. It didn't make headlines, not the kind of headlines people outside the industry would notice. There was no splashy front page or late-night monologue. Just a line buried halfway through a Tuesday press release. Cray Tech Solutions has reached a confidential settlement agreement with Keller Systems. Both parties are satisfied with the resolution. But everyone in the know understood exactly what that meant. The number was rumored to be north of $200 million, not the full $480 million Keller had demanded, but far more than Cray Tech had claimed it would ever consider. The kind of check that doesn't get written unless something went very, very wrong. Internally, Cray Tech tried to spin it. Mutual misunderstanding. Legacy system ambiguity. Process failures during a transitional period. But the walls told the real story. Martin Greaves was gone within a week of the settlement. No farewell lunch, no LinkedIn post. Just a one-sentence HR blast. Martin Greaves has resigned from his position as General Counsel to focus on personal matters. Those personal matters, it turned out, included avoiding liability for willful misconduct, signing off on document destruction in defiance of federal legal holds, and becoming a cautionary example in 3 corporate legal seminars before the quarter was out. His office was cleared after hours, his nameplate removed, his access revoked faster than any intern's. Meanwhile, in an unremarkable envelope hand-delivered to a small office suite in a suburban consulting park, Elizabeth Monroe received her own piece of closure. A quiet HR settlement, modest on paper, but accompanied by something more unusual, a formal letter from the Cray Tech Board, unsigned, marked confidential, never to be referenced publicly. Inside, it read, "Miss Monroe, we recognize the integrity of your service, the accuracy of your warnings, and the gravity of the decisions made in contradiction to them. Please consider this letter a formal acknowledgement of the contributions you made and the consequences that followed in your absence. Regret that your objections were not heeded sooner. No apology from Martin, no phone call, no blinking you were right message from anyone who once laughed at her binder tabs or skimmed her memos. But that letter, that was more than enough. Because by then, Elizabeth was no longer just the records lady. She had a client list. She had speaking requests. She had her own LLC, Custodia Consulting. She trained in-house legal teams now on metadata integrity, defensible deletion policies, and how not to blow up your litigation defense with a single bad directive. Her inbox was always full. Law firms, healthcare systems, even government agencies, asking for trainings, webinars, quick policy reviews. She never rushed. She never sold fear. She just showed them where the cracks would form if they ignored the structure. And her story? It circulated the way cautionary tales always do, whispered sidebars at compliance conferences, in footnotes of litigation CLEs, in hallway conversations between GCs who suddenly want to revisit those boring retention schedules. She never had to say a word. One day, a panel in Dallas titled Digital Discovery and Legal Ethics in the Age of AI, a man in an expensive suit, clearly new to the circuit, made a passing joke into the mic. "Let's be honest," he chuckled. "No one ever went to prison because a records officer forgot a file." The room gave a polite, weary laugh. Elizabeth was walking past the back row, carrying her notes for the next session. She didn't stop, didn't turn her head, just kept walking, quiet heels clicking softly over the carpet. But she smiled. And 2 rows ahead, an older woman, another compliance officer, with graying hair and a badge that read Legacy Systems Advisor, smiled too. They didn't know each other, didn't need to. The joke was dead. The paper had won. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.